Welcome everyone. We are so excited to have you back in the classroom with us today. We're going to be talking about getting on the balcony. You may remember that this is an important tool for making progress on your leadership journey, and we're excited to have an opportunity to review it and discuss it, and we look forward to, of course, seeing you in the seed plot to discuss this further from a reflective perspective and hear your examples and your experiences. I'm Dr. Mary Banward, and with me today is Dr. Astrid Vigemil.
Hello, everybody.
Heifetz and Linsky tell us in their book Leadership on the Line that there are few practical ideas that are more obvious or more critical than the need to get perspective in the midst of action. And that's so true for those of you, and we know all of you who are tuned in and listening are out there doing this very difficult work of making progress on the things that you care about, doing this effective work and engaging in the process of leadership. And so you know very well how tough that is when you're in the moment, in the heat of the moment, and that heat is going up. How do you keep perspective? This is a wonderful tool, a wonderful resource, and so we're excited to talk you through this today. And let's start with just a quick review and a refresher on exactly what does this metaphor mean.
Yes, Mary, as you said, it is important for us to gain perspective. And one of the metaphors that you probably remember is the metaphor of the dance floor and the balcony. And just to provide a visual, let's imagine that we are on a party. There is a huge dance floor and there is music playing. And naturally, you and your dancing partner are enjoying yourselves. You probably let yourself get carried away by the music and by how much fun you are having. And at the end of the party, all you can remember is how much fun you had. So when somebody asks you how the party was, your natural response may be, well, the music was really good and I had a really good time. But what you probably missed is that maybe some people were not having as much fun as you were. And so one perspective that could have been helpful is the balcony metaphor, the balcony perspective. Had you been to the balcony before, you could have observed that not everybody was dancing, that maybe the music was too loud, that maybe some refreshments needed to be refilled, and that not everybody really was participating, that a lot of things could have been done to fix some of these minor situations. So this really provides us a really helpful tool to understand how important perspective is and how important that reflective moment of going to the balcony to observe a situation and to maybe make smart interventions is.
Perfect. So let's talk through just real quickly, a little bit more specifically, the definitions for both a dance floor and a balcony. So when you think about that dance floor, as Astrid has just talked about, where everyone's dancing, that's right where the action is, right? It's where the friction, the noise, the tension, and the systemic activity are all taking place. That's where all the energy is. That's also, you've got to keep in mind, very likely where your triggers are and where your emotions are as well, which is why if you stay on the dance floor too long, it can actually take you out of the game of making effective progress, more so than you ever could think it would. Now, ultimately, it is the place where the work gets done. Keep that in mind. But the key here that we're going to be talking about is how can you make the dance floor a much more useful space for you to get work done, as opposed to getting yanked out of the game by your triggers. Because here's our cautionary note. Too often we get wrapped up in the middle of these tensions and we are not able to move toward productivity. And that's really our goal, right? Is to help move the system, make progress in a way that the system can thrive.
So one of the things that we can do, and as we've been talking about, is to stop and engage in a process of reflexivity. And so, if we follow the metaphor of the balcony is a place where we take distance and that we engage in careful observation. And this is important because observing is going to be the first step of smart and insightful interventions. And so we taking a distance doesn't necessarily mean that we are completely detached of the situation, but this is going to allow us to take a break and to think very carefully of what is happening. And so it is also a vantage point to view the landscape of our system. And so that place of distance provides us with a lot of perspective, and it allows us to see a bigger picture than we thought we had when we were part of the dance floor. And so gaining that insight and being aware of that vantage point of the landscape is going to be necessary and important in future interventions. And so this balcony is also a space in which we mentally and sometimes physically we disengage from the tension and the noise, and being in the dance floor and engaging in the process of leadership is going to usually there's going to be a lot of tension and a lot of noise involved. There's emotions flowing, and there's going to be a lot of tensions that we will have to deal with. And so maybe taking some distance and maybe taking a break mentally and, like I said, physically will help us gain that perspective, and maybe will help us have some of those aha moments that interventions usually need. And so it provides a break from like the friction and allows us to recalibrate and regain our purpose. And so it's really important that we take those breaks. It is also really important that we find a balance between how much of a break we are going to take. In a way, how much time we're going to spend on the balcony. Too often, people confuse being quiet with being on the balcony when they don't realize that being quiet, you can be in the dance floor and being quiet. And so not participating or just being quiet doesn't necessarily mean that you are on the balcony. So the balcony is where perspective taking and reflection happens, and where interventions are conceived, because ultimately we have to go back to the dance floor to make interventions and to keep engaging in the process of leadership. And so let's try not to confuse those two terms, and it is not really a place where we can dwell too much. We have to take those breaks and take perspective, but be very mindful of our place in the balcony.
That is an excellent description, Astrid. So if we take that just a little bit farther, then building on that, what is our goal? Actually, our goal is not to just live on the balcony or live on the dance floor, but it's to come as close as you can to being in both places simultaneously. And how hard is that, Astrid?
Very, very hard.
It is so hard. And we work on it all the time. You've got to keep in mind, the practice of adaptive leadership begins with the word practice, right? And that's what this requires too. So there are some really key points to remember. Number one, it is so important to see yourself when you're looking at from the balcony perspective. You've got to see your own self on that dance floor as well as the other participants. The balcony not only lets you observe objectively what's taking place within your system, but also your role and to what extent are you an instigator of that? To what extent are you blocking things or causing your own set of difficulties? In addition, based on what Astrid just said, where she explained that it's very much not a scenario where just being quiet is being on the balcony. It's not it at all. Being on the balcony is a very active space to inhabit, And it's what we would call an iterative experience, not a static experience. So if you have someone who is quiet, never ever assume that just because they haven't said anything during the meeting that they are on the balcony. They may be making their grocery list. The iterative process means that you're on the balcony, you're on the dance floor, you're on the balcony, you're on the dance floor. In fact, you could be on the balcony observing yourself making an active intervention on the dance floor. That's why this is a practice, and it takes some time to conceive it as such, but it's important that you start to think about trying to inhabit both spaces simultaneously. Also, it's a skill, so bottom line is everybody can learn it. And again, we all need to practice it so we can. And it's most importantly about diagnosis. So this is, you'll remember that there are 3 phases of work: observing, interpreting, and intervening. And when you're on the balcony, that gives you an opportunity to objectively gather data and also to analyze that data so you can develop smart interpretations and conceptualize smart interventions as you move back down to the dance floor.
Yes, and one of these, or the first of these diagnostic tasks that are going to help us kind of observe and interpret and intervene, is to distinguish the technical problems from adaptive challenges. And you may remember our conversations about the difference between technical or adaptive challenges. And so this is a conversation that is necessary to revisit. Most challenges are going to come bundled with technical and adaptive aspects. There's going to be a lot of technical things that we need to take care of, but most likely every challenge is going to have an adaptive or many adaptive components. And so we are attaching a worksheet that you should revisit and work on your own. But following on that idea of technical versus adaptive challenges, there are certain things that we can do to kind of like distinguish what's technical versus adaptive. Like I said, many challenges are going to be having like those 2 components, but when we can maybe see that there's like more than what the eye meets, when the people's hearts and minds are super engaged into these challenges, when people's hearts and minds need to change and not just their preferences or routine behaviors, we can talk about an adaptive challenge. Another way that we can differentiate a technical problem versus an adaptive challenge is if we look at a situation and we extract all the technical problems, and if the outcome is still a problem, if there is a situation that still needs to be addressed, we can talk about an adaptive challenge. And so the process of exclusion and trying to exclude and take care of the technical fixes first, and if we still have a challenge, we can talk about the adaptive nature of leadership. If after many tries and many technical fixes, the conflict still persists, if we maybe observe a crisis in the middle of these situations, we talk about adaptive challenges. And so it is going to be very distracting, but it's also going to be very common because of the paradigms that we have, to always go to the technical problems, and the adaptive challenges we're going to leave maybe out, or maybe we're going to try to avoid. So it is important that we keep the differences in mind, because distinguishing what is technical from what is adaptive is going to help us observe and diagnose and interpret and intervene.
Great. One of our other diagnostic tasks is to try to find out where people are at. And you'll remember that under this the competency of Energize Others, we talk about starting where they are, not where you are. But in order to do that, we've got to back up into diagnosis and figure out, well, if we're going to start where they are, where on earth are they? So one of your diagnostic tools by getting on the balcony is to gather a true understanding of the perspectives of the various factions that are operating in the room and or the system as you're trying to make progress. And you know what? This number one requires listening. And it also then, accompanying listening, requires curiosity. A lot of you will remember being peppered with the question of why? And that's a great question because it allows you to gain perspective and find out where people are coming from. Doing this diagnostic task of finding out where people are at also asks you to challenge your own interpretations, and you have to be open to that. So for instance, never make assumptions about people's responses to your interventions or people's responses to your attempts to make progress without gathering data first, because you don't know what kind of pressures or what perspective they're coming from. So at the end of the day, we want you to try to engage this diagnostic task and test it so that ultimately you can engage the Energizing Others competency of starting where they are, not where you are. That's going to send you down the road much farther in order to make effective progress.
And following that line, another very helpful diagnostic task that we can have in mind is something that you may remember. Listen to the song beneath the words. And so what does that mean? This saying really helps us explain the philosophy and the essence behind this construct. There's always a little truth behind every just kidding, a little curiosity behind every just wondering, a little knowledge behind every I don't know, and a little emotion behind every I don't care. So what Listen to the Song Beneath the Words tells us is that we should pay attention in this process of observing, in this process of reflecting, in this process of being on the balcony. We need to be data gatherers. We need to look for data that goes beyond just the actual words. And so we can look for data on maybe body language or eye contact, but maybe we can go a little beyond and look for data on emotional responses or like just the energy in the room. We can pay attention to what is not being said just as much as what is being said. We maybe can pay attention to unusual factions or alliances or disproportionate reactions. And so paying attention to all those elements is going to really give us a lot of quality in the picture that we are trying to draw. It really is going to give us a lot of information on that perspective taking exercise that we are trying to engage on.
So our final diagnostic task is to read the authority figure for clues. So you'll remember, obviously, in doing the work of leadership, especially adaptive leadership, one of the key things we know is that authority figures don't have expertise, which is why it's an adaptive challenge, right? But those authority figures are still present. They're still in the room, so to speak. They still play a significant role in the system, and most importantly, they're a resource. This is one way that you need to be thinking about using them as a resource. So as you seek to instigate change, look for signals from them. They have access to a wide variety of information you may not, and therefore provide critical signals to you about the impact of your initiative on the system. They have an open access to all the variety of external pressures that you may not be aware of. So, as well as operating factions that you may not yet quite have been able to tap into. So they're going to be considering reactions and responses, their responses to the various factions and the reactions of the factions to your initiative. Also looking to your authority figures who are in your system and operating around and in and out of your system look for any types of signals that they have regarding levels of anxiety and perhaps costs of anxiety in the system as a whole. They'll be able to tap into that in a way that you can't, because it's very likely there'll be informal and perhaps formal communication channels you don't have access to that will be feeding them information. So be mindful that this is another area. The level of anxiety in the system, you're going to have to deal with at some point in time. Better to deal with it before it becomes a crisis. And finally, they're going to be able to see where there are shifts on relevant views, again, that may be exerting external pressures on the system and or on a variety of different challenges for you in making progress on your issues. So look to try to get a sense of, are they moving away from being very positive on a particular, or having a very positive view about a particular issue, a particular component to your initiative, or a particular aspect of the problem, i.e. challenge that you're trying to address. Here's our cautionary note. Don't assume the authority figure is A, operating independently, or B, offering personal opinion. They have a lot of pressure that sits on their shoulders, a lot of perspective that they carry. And so any of their responses back to you will always be through those lenses. So we've talked through our metaphor, and we've provided a refresher on that. We've given a little bit of additional detail really on what is that balcony, what is that dance floor. The fact that it's a skill set is so important, and so we offered 4 different diagnostic tasks for you to think about. Final thoughts, Astrid, on how we can help everyone develop this skill set so they can make the most effective progress possible.
Well, engaging in the process of leadership is not an easy task, but a more manageable way to do it is definitely by taking perspective. And so utilizing this metaphor of going to the balcony and making a stop, taking a break from the tension, I think it's really going to help us recharge our energy and make more insightful and smarter decisions on what smart experiments and what interventions we should follow.
Perfect. And that's exactly why we're excited to get back in the classroom. So just a reminder, acts of leadership are so sacred, and absolutely everyone may count. The world would certainly be a better place if we all, including us, practice leadership a little bit more of our time. We look forward to seeing you next time back in the classroom.